Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Hello there. I've made a lot of videos in my short 4 weeks on YouTube, 16 as of now, and throughout the time I've been making content, I've received a lot of comments asking me about XYZ, which was very unexpected. And thank you for 4K, by the way. The biggest comment I received is a lot of people talking about how I am very negative with Genshin, and despite talking about how I enjoy the game and I've played it for 4 years, I very rarely talk about anything positive, and that's fair. The YouTube space overall is dominated with negative criticism, so even if I do make a positive video, I'm going to have to package it like it's negative in order for it to do well, which is an unfortunate fact of the internet. So today, I figured I'd give miHoYo some advice. In my last 2 videos, I've talked a lot about how the endgame of Genshin is very hit or miss. With Spiral Abyss being a damage sponge that requires a ridiculous amount of investment to even clear it, while artificially increasing the difficulty with elemental shields and HP sponges, and Imaginarium Theater straight up just not letting you play it if you don't have enough characters to start it. Both of these are very poor examples of endgame, because when players ask for proper endgame content, they're asking for one of 2 things. We are either asking for a high difficulty endgame mode that lets us push the very limitations of our character so that we can see exactly how far we've grown, or we're asking for heavily skill-based content that only the best accounts with the best artifacts and high mechanical skill on the player's end can fully clear. And with Genshin's current systems in play, I acknowledge the fact that it's very hard for us to actually get this, so I've come today to propose a couple solutions. Those solutions are in the form of new game modes, because now that miHoYo has opened the floodgates with the Imaginarium Theater, we can come up with new modes that could potentially actually be fun for new players, which is where I come into my first mode. The fact of the matter is, in a world of wave clear content like the Imaginarium Theater and the Spiral Abyss, it's very hard for characters that excel in single target damage to actually shine. Mulan and Kinich are very good examples of characters that do amazing single target damage. They are very impressive, but in a world with Alhaitham and Kinich that excel much more greatly in multi-target content, while the damage difference not actually being too great in terms of their DPS teams, it's really not reliable to build them for Spiral Abyss. Because statistically, when more than one enemy is on field at a time, their damage ceiling drops exponentially. That doesn't mean they're not good, they're both still good, and hell, a lot of Mulan fans would even point to the fact that Neuvillette had faster clears last Spiral Abyss, which means fuck nothing, because last Spiral Abyss was a Mulan buffing abyss, and in actuality, the two are very comparable, and Neuvillette excels more frequently than Mulan does, by proxy of his kit not being limited to single target, but I digress, that is the main point. Why would you ever use Mulan over Neuvillette? Why would you ever use Kinich over Alhaitham? These characters are objectively performing worse unless you're doing single target content, which we all know Spiral Abyss more often than not is multi-target. So propose a new game mode. To those of you who play Honkai Star Rail, you would know that it currently has a game mode known as Apocalyptic Shadow, which, in my opinion, is one of the weakest of its new in-game modes, but that has nothing to do with the major idea. This game mode is entirely revolved around boss enemies and your ability to effectively deal with them in a time limit. Now these enemies, unlike overworld enemies, are much stronger than their other counterparts. They receive significant new mechanics, new buffs, and powers that make them much stronger than the average boss in an overworld encounter. They're something akin to super bosses, bosses that are overwhelmingly jacked up to make it so that a specific subset of characters which would usually underperform have a place in the meta. And Genshin could very easily implement this because we have a lot of bosses that are very unique to specific encounters that haven't appeared in a long time. These bosses being the super variants of all the hypostasis which haven't appeared since the original Hypostatic Symphony event could be a very good first encounter. If not, you could bring in triple Mabukenkis, the Oceanid boss where you actually fight the Oceanid and not its mimics, and a couple of other interesting super bosses from the game's history. Bosses such as the Arnar corruption or enemies which, under normal circumstances, wouldn't be able to appear. We could also make it so that, much like in Apoc Shadow, certain characters are receiving massive amounts of buff depending on their archetype. Star Rail does this by making Apoc Shadow mostly centered around break teams, which I feel like that is significantly too restrictive, so let's do it like this. In this in-game mode, it is fully possible to clear these hard, difficult versions of bosses with full teams. However, you can use characters that meet the criteria of the buff and clear it a little easier. For example, characters that use Night Soul Blessing states could be one, characters that drain their HP, characters that put their HP in reservation with the Bond of Life mechanic. They will receive buffs in ways that don't directly increase their damage, but instead helps them deal with enemy boss mechanics that would typically be a little more annoying. For example, Mabukenki could have some sort of shield that doesn't deplete normally like other elemental shields. Instead, in order to break the shield, you need to meet X amount of requirements through a parry mechanic, which Genshin also has that in the game files. A parry mechanic was used in an early event and hasn't been seen ever since. Parrying the boss will allow you to break the shield until eventually he goes into a down state where he is significantly more vulnerable to damage for 20 seconds, making it so that effectively you're going to have to take him down 2 different times in order to actually kill him. Characters that benefit from Elemental Mastery, Night Soul Blessing State, Bond of Life, HP mechanics will receive a slightly more powerful parry so that it's a little bit easier, but you're not brain locked into having to use these specific archetypes. And of course, there is no time limit. If you have enough skill to beat the boss, you get the full rewards. We can pull a page from the Wuwa books if they want and make it so that every time you defeat the boss, they get another scaling of difficulty. The higher you go up the ladder, the more powerful mechanics the boss gets. For example, level 1 of the Mabukenki can be just Kenki by himself, but once you defeat stage 2, he will round himself back up and go in for seconds. On the second encounter, he will be able to split himself into his Animo form and his Cryo form. Level 3 allows him to split himself in his Animo, Cryo, and Standard form, and then level 4 will allow him to use the special effects these characters have, like freezing the floor to make your parry timing a little slower. Shields and healers are allowed, but I say healing should be decreased by roughly 50% efficiency, that way you're not getting your full health bar back in 1 HP tick, and shields have a mechanic in this mode alone which makes them get instantly shattered in 1 hit. This sounds especially brutal, but I really don't think it is. Most characters get their shield back in 10 to 20 seconds, meaning you're effectively getting 1 free hit within that time frame, and healing needs to be significantly reduced so that you're A, not getting 1 shot, and B, not instantly healing all your health back, making it so that it's not a worry if you get 1 shot. Getting 2 shot seems fair to me. This makes it so that effectively across your whole team you'll get 2 total hits, but you'll also not go down in 1 hit, which means if you play your cards right and you get your HP back quickly enough, you'll be able to absorb more damage, and if you're being careful with your shield, of course. Now, another version of in-game that I think would be interesting would to borrow once again from Wuwa. Wuthering Waves has something known as the Tower of Aversity, which is their equivalent to Spiral Abyss. The Tower of Aversity is like a combination of the Spiral Abyss and the Imaginarium Theater, taking the floor-by-floor combat mechanic while also mixing it with the stamina mechanic you have while you play the theater. For those who haven't played Wuwa, the Tower of Aversity is split up into 3 major sections. 2 have 4 stages, and the third only has 2 stages. The 2 sections that have 4 stages take up stamina mechanics in terms of the level difficulty. For example, floor 1 of the stage only takes up 1, 2 takes up 2, 3 takes up 3, and 4 takes up 4. Both stages in the middle take up 5. Every character in the game at the start of the rotation is allotted 10 whole stamina points throughout the whole duration of the Abyss, meaning effectively you can bring 1 whole team on one side and 1 whole team on the other side. And then finally, you can bring in 1 team in the center region. This means that you'll need 3 full teams in order to break your way through the entirety of the Tower of Adversity and not run out of stamina. However, here's the catch. You can bring in any character so long as you own them, and any character can be used without limitation, meaning you can bring in your level 70 character into the level 60 difficulty and only bring them in by themselves to make them solo the content to save stamina on your higher level characters. This means you are actually having to put in thought into the teams you bring in. You can't just mindlessly select Nuvolette, Farina, Kazuha, and Zillinan as your highest difficulty team and steamroll your way through the highest levels of the chamber, because you're gonna want to bring those characters in onto the major section of difficulty at the very end. Now obviously Genshin has been out for far longer and has access to far more characters, so I think it is fair to bring in maybe 4 chambers and have 2 chambers that have 2 sections of 5 and then 4 chambers that meet the same criteria as Wuwa, meaning effectively you're going to need 4 teams. Now I know I complained in Imaginarium Theater that you need to bring in X amount of characters in order to participate, but here's the difference between Wuwa and the Imaginarium Theater. In Wuthering Waves, you can bring in any character regardless of level or equipment. So for example, in Wuwa, I only have 2 incredibly powerful teams in the form of my Jianxi team and my Chengli team. I know that the characters on this team only have 10 stamina, meaning I'm going to need to bring them into the hardest floors of content. So when I do Chamber 3, I have my Cheng-Li do one of the 2 chambers, and then I have my Jianqi do one of the other 2 chambers, which takes off 5 of their 10 total points for the whole team. I then use these 2 teams for the highest difficulty of Chamber 4 in both the other sections, taking off another 4 points. This leaves them with 1 point each, meaning I can bring them into the easiest difficulty and clear that, or I could just bring in a level 70 on the easiest difficulty and reserve points for my highest level teams. That means that there is actual strategy involved on what you bring into this game mode to begin with, so you don't actually have to build 3 full teams. You could halfway build a couple level 70s and have them carry you through the easier sections, while only hyper-investing in 2 teams like you would for standard Spiral Abyss and steamrolling the difficulty that way. This means it's beneficial for all players, because players who are in the higher end of the life cycle will be able to use characters that they typically wouldn't drag into the Spiral Abyss while also having to implement more strategy. Meanwhile, players who are lower into the game cycle will still be able to participate in the tower, leveling up their characters and at least gaining some of these rewards. They're not completely bricked off from accessing it like how they are from the Imaginarium Theater. You could in theory go in with one hyper-leveled character and get a full clear, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult than usual. As for the enemies that I would put in this game mode, I really don't think it matters. Put in enemies like the Spiral Abyss. This is more of a thought-provoking team-building difficulty, much like how the Imaginarium Theater wanted to be, while also giving players a bit more difficult in-game content. This way we're catering to both players. The first game mode option I presented is for the people who want to implement physical skill into the game, while giving you an actual challenge to overcome. Mechanical skill will prowess in the boss-oriented game mode. Meanwhile, the secondary game mode is one for the thinkers, one for people that want to organize their team comps and figure out how much they want to invest in X amount of characters. This means that it'll be more of a tactitional side than more of a mechanical skill side, giving every player what they want. And finally, the last thing, make sure the rewards are equal to Spiral Abyss, but don't put it on a looping resetting timer. You adding new in-game modes to the game means nothing if it takes 3 times as long to reset. Make it so it has its own timer. Make it so that players who are high enough investment level on their account who can clear this difficult content are actually getting more rewards overall instead of the same amount of rewards they were getting to begin with. It makes no sense to stretch out the same amount of in-game rewards we would have gotten before for significantly more work. All that does is make players upset. And with that all being said, like, comment, subscribe. See ya.